Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on a slump in the polls for the Smith government. But first, Labour setting its sights on the UCP government.
Not just for the sake of the teachers, not just for the sake of bargaining rights, but for the sake of our shared democracy and the future of our province.
Alberta Labour leaders say they're mobilizing in response to the government, invoking the notwithstanding clause, encouraging workers to volunteer for campaigns to recall politicians while beginning the process of organizing towards a potential general strike. And joining us now to discuss that and more, with the fall sitting underway, NDP leader Naheed Nenshi. Mr. Nenshi, good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Michael. It's always a pleasure.
All right, well, let's start on the response of the unions. What weight do you expect that to carry?
I think this is even bigger than that. You know, the Ontario government attempted to use the notwithstanding clause a few years ago, and they repealed it in 4 days because of enormous public pressure, not just from unions. And we're seeing that. You know, the government rammed this through. They used the notwithstanding clause preemptively for the first time in Alberta history. They changed the rules of the House to ram it through in 1 day, which we think has never been done before in Alberta's history. We finished up just after the baseball game ended at 2:30 in the morning on Monday night, Tuesday morning, and they clearly thought this was over. It is not over. Today, students are walking out of class. Many schools have no extracurricular activities. Teachers are dispirited. Parents are super happy to have their kids back at school, but super angry at the way it was done. And as you see, workers and their unions see this as an unprecedented attack on their own Charter of Rights freedom. And look, this government has signaled that they are going to use the notwithstanding clause over and over again to override people's rights. The next one will be vulnerable children. The one after that will be healthcare workers. So it's more important now than ever that Albertans make their voices heard and say, nah, this is not the government we thought we elected.
Now, would your party stand in solidarity with unions? Were they to coalesce around an actual general strike?
You know, there are many, many options that they are looking at right now, and we always stand with workers and with their union. The critical thing here for me to say is this never should have come to this. The government had so many options to fix this problem. They've known for 6 months, well, they've known for 3 years that teachers are concerned about class size and complexity. The Minister of Education yesterday admitted that yesterday was the first day he looked into what other provinces are doing on class size. The government knew in the spring that the teachers weren't going to accept their deal. They had all summer to sit down with the teachers and try and figure out what they could come up with, what deal they could make. Instead, they took a summer vacation. In the fall, they came back to the teachers with the same deal they had already overwhelmingly rejected, with a free COVID shot thrown in, a shot that should be free for all Alberta, frankly. What did they think was going to happen? Of course, the teachers rejected it again. I believe the government engineered this strike. I believe they wanted to diminish public support for the teachers, public support for education. And what has obviously happened is exactly the opposite. So it's not just workers and their unions that are mad. It is everyone who believes in fundamental freedoms and everyone who believes in competent government. So they will rue the day they did this, because that day I could feel it in the House. The ground was shifting. And that day, I think, was the beginning of the end of this government.
Okay, so then as the opposition, where does your party take the fight over the Back to School Act and use of that notwithstanding clause?
I think our job is really to help people understand precisely what this government has done. You know, when we start talking Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, it gets really abstract really fast, and people's eyes start to water. But here's the thing. Peter Naheed was the one who engineered that clause in the Constitution. And 10 years after it was put in, he gave a very big lecture at the University of Alberta in which he said that clause should only be used after the courts have deemed a law to be unconstitutional, and it can only be used if the law explains precisely why, time limits it, and it's passed by a supermajority of the legislature. None of those things happened this week. So they're using this clause, and it basically let's put it this way. This is the first time in Alberta history that a government has knowingly passed a law that it knows it's unconstitutional, that it knows overrides the Charter of Rights, and they passed it anyway and tried to protect themselves with the notwithstanding clause. Whether you agree or disagree with this government, I think all Albertans stand united that we don't want a tyrannical government that will pass unconstitutional laws when it's convenient to them.
Okay, shift gears a little bit. Better Together town hall campaign. You and members of your caucus traveling the province over the summer in a bid to hear from Albertans. How does that exercise now translate into impact in the fall sitting?
Terrific. So, we did travel across the province. We knocked on 200,000 doors. We went to every music festival, small town rodeo, community dog park. And then we had this series of 10 town halls, if you like. I prefer calling them community gatherings. We got nearly as many people as the Alberta government got for their Alberta Next panels without $1 million of taxpayer-funded advertising. And what people really said is, yes, they stand against separatism, which was the original goal, but they told us what they were really interested in. The increasing cost of living, good sustainable jobs, the economy, healthcare, education, and of course, separatism. And so we're using that as the themes for what we're moving forward with. So this fall, for example, we'll be talking a lot about how we can protect your paycheck. And today we introduced the first bill in that area. It's called Protecting Workers' Paychecks. It's about increasing the minimum wage and indexing it to inflation and protecting workers' tips so that when you press that button on the machine to give a tip, you know that the person who gave you that service is getting the tip and it's not being skimmed off. These are small things, but they're critical things the government is not doing to help people deal with the cost of living.
All right, one more question for you. As Albertans have been waiting to see Naheed Nenshi take a seat in the legislature, face off with Danielle Smith across the aisle. What should be expected in that regard in this fall sitting?
Well, when I walked in on my first day in the House, which was the throne speech last week, very ceremonial, military uniforms and trumpets and things, it was really wonderful, and I felt a deep sense of responsibility and gratitude to the people of Edmonton Strathcona who put their trust in me and realized, I'm fewer than 1,000 people have ever served as members of this Legislative Assembly in the history of Alberta, and that's a big deal. In the first 4 days have been very, very adventurous. My very first day in House was the day that we went until 2 a.m. to pass this blatantly unconstitutional bill. And as you said, the way you framed it was, I get to go toe-to-toe with the Premier. Well, I haven't yet, because the Premier didn't show up. The Premier wasn't in the House on the most important debate, the first Premier in Alberta history to preemptively use the notwithstanding clause. She wasn't even there. She couldn't delay her junket to the Middle East by a few hours so she could at least defend her government's position. And she hasn't been there since. In fact, I understand that she's going to miss fully half of the sitting days this fall because she's off in the Middle East for who knows what reason. So I'm looking forward to going toe-to-toe with her. Meanwhile, I'm not so sure all those ministers who have been left twisting in the wind in her absence are really enjoying going toe-to-toe with me.
All right, sir. We'll have to leave it there for time. As always, appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Michael. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. That's NDP leader Naheed Nenshi.